I want to tell a few stories about safe harbor or harboring people or providing refuge, or sometimes we refer to the church as a sanctuary. I think that sounds super formal, but as a concept, it's this beautiful concept where this becomes a sanctuary for people in times of need, a refuge, or whatever that is. So we're going to tell a few stories about providing safe harbor for those as we go along. I'm kind of a likable guy for the most part. I'm sure people don't like me. I know that happens from time to time, and it bothers me when it does. But I don't usually know, so it's fine. A few times I have known, so don't worry about it. A few times I have known. When I was in university, I was at a school that had a rule. Men or boys, we were really boys, in one hall and women in another. And it wasn't ultra-conservative, like you could cross over it, but there was a curfew. You could not be in a dorm of the opposite sex after midnight. I think it was midnight. And I got to university, and I was just enjoying myself and like to study, like to hang out. And so I frequently was past midnight in the hall of the wrong dorm. And sometimes that required like these escapes, you could say, windows or like running out of a hall. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was kind of weird. Really? Bradley wasn't that weird. I was kind of weird, and so for a while I ran everywhere. I didn't walk anywhere. I ran everywhere. And so I left the dorm like it wasn't that late, maybe 12:15, 12:30, and one of the students in charge, one of the older students in charge, the RA that divvied out whatever penalties and stuff like that, saw me leave. And I didn't know this at the time. I promise you, I didn't know this at the time. But I got out of the door, and I ran, because that's what I do. I was running everywhere. And I ran off. And I find out a few weeks later that this girl had seen me and then saw me run and took this huge offense that I was so rude and that I ran off and that she, disrespected her authority as the RA in the dorm. And so this big thing just because I was weird. And so I say all that to say really nothing, but to give you a fun story and to think about in different ways the people that sort of gave me refuge some nights when I needed to get out or to find a window or something like that. That story sounds worse than it did in my head. But there's these stories where there's this place in life where we need to find a refuge, where we need to find somebody that is willing to go that extra mile and to help us in our time of need. One such story, we're going to tell a biblical story now. One such story comes, this woman, Rahab. Are we familiar with Rahab? A few nods of heads. So here's where we're at. This is Old Testament. Moses has now passed on, and they've been promised, the Israelites have been promised a land that God is going to give to them. Huge kinds of problems with the Joshua narratives and everything that follows Judges and all of this super violent stuff and all of that. And we're going to try to avoid that as much as possible. But Joshua becomes the leader, comes in charge, and is continuing this movement forward of the Israelite people with God's blessing and God's movement of these people into a land that He's promised them. And so Joshua and camp are set up, and they send spies to the city of Jericho. 2 spies go into Jericho. It's funny we started where never mind, that gets really awkward. two spies go to Jericho, and they stay the night with a prostitute, and she provides them for that, 24 hours, this moment of safe harbor. She provides them with this opportunity. In fact, as they're there, the king sends guards to her house. They said, we've heard there's these two Israelites that are coming, and they are only here to spy on the land. They are only here because they are going to attempt to take over our country, our space, our city. And so you need to tell us. And she says, oh, listen, she's good at this. She says, listen, they were here. And when night fell, they took off through the city gates. And I, that's all I know. And so they press on and said, well, if you know anything, let us know. And she instead has hidden them up on the roof. And she's covered them. This is kind of a thing that she's covered them. This is part of what she does probably to make a living. And she's covered them with grains to hide them on top of the roof. And so here in this moment, when really these guys, these spies should be caught, should be in trouble, end up on a roof looking for a way out of the city. Now, the second she tells the guards that they've gone, they head out of the city and they head east. It's important. They head east. And so she goes and lets them know, but what happens is they close the city gates. So there's no way out. There's nowhere for them to go. So they must rely on this woman to provide harbor, to provide refuge during this moment of really pretty dire circumstances. Now here's the deal. Whatever reason she's doing this, she has put herself in extreme risk by doing it. If they find out that she's kept these criminals, these spies, they're going to kill her and her whole family and everyone she knows. There's no mercy, there's no pity, there's nothing. It's just, we're going to wipe you out. Don't mess around with the king because it's not going to go well. And so she provides them, she gives them life. Basically, she saves their life in this moment, and in the process, she risks her own. Flash forward several thousand years, a few hundred years ago. I want to tell a second story. This man named Arnold Gragston. Arnold Gragston was a slave, and in the 1850s, he's living on a plantation, and he tells his story about his slave owner. He says, "Oh, he was a pretty good guy. I mean, he beat me, sure, but not as bad as some of the others." That's the kind of context, okay? But he had someone there that was just helping us learn. Of course, when we told him where we'd been all day and we'd been learning, then he beat us for that. But that's another point. And so here he is in this fairly decent life, and as he puts it, and he says, and he goes one day a-courtin'. He goes a-courtin' at another plantation home, and he comes across this beautiful girl that he's just sort of smitten with. He doesn't know her. He doesn't know her name. He doesn't know anything about her. And the woman at the door asks him, not the one he's smitten with, the woman at the door asks him, "Can you take her across the river to Mr. Rankin?" Now, across the Ohio River becomes Northern Territory, where they essentially earn their freedom or given their freedom. They are free if they can only cross this river. Obviously, to do that puts him at extreme risk. Just thinking about it, he's afraid. He's already not doing what he's supposed to do. He talks about, I never got much work done, and then I was out all the time courting or doing whatever. And so he's like never at his house, and he's never doing what he's supposed to. And he's concerned that if he goes sort of this next step forward to help this woman across the river, that it puts him at extreme risk. We're probably not talking about a beating. We're probably talking about death. We're probably talking about him literally risking his life to take this woman across the river. It was too much for him. He couldn't do it. So he thought about it. He's like, I can't